Have you ever reached a point in life where your own kindness began to feel heavy? Not like a burden others placed on you, but like a weight you carried quietly for years, stitched into every apology you didn't owe, every favor you said yes to when your heart whispered no, every moment you put others first and told yourself it was the right thing to do. You see, we're told that kindness is the highest virtue, that to give is noble, to serve is selfless, to endure is strength. And perhaps for much of our lives that was true. Perhaps it carried us through parenthood, through marriages, through friendships and losses, and long nights we rarely speak of now. But what happens when the very thing that once made us feel proud starts leaving us feeling empty? What if, and stay with me here, what if your tenderness has quietly become the reason you're always tired, always available, always silently aching? There comes a moment, often in the later chapters of life, where the soul begins to whisper something unexpected. Not louder, but clearer. It says, "You've been kind long enough. Now it's time to be kind to yourself." And that's where the story begins. Not with cruelty, not with bitterness, but with a quiet decision to live differently, to stop being a sponge for other people's chaos and start being a guardian of your own peace. This isn't about becoming cold-hearted. This is about learning how to love with wisdom, how to give without vanishing, and how to stop confusing exhaustion with virtue. Because one day, maybe today, you'll realize that protecting your own heart isn't selfish. It's sacred. Part 1. Emotional detachment, the hidden wisdom of the weathered heart. It didn't happen all at once. No thunderclap, no revelation in the mirror. Just a slow, steady ache, like a song that kept playing in the background of your life. Quiet, familiar, and a little bit haunting. You begin to notice it in moments, when you pick up the phone and feel dread instead of warmth, when someone's voice reminds you not of love, but of demands, when you realize that your days, the ones you have fewer of now, are being spent fixing wounds that aren't even yours. And so you wonder, is this what kindness has become? A slow erosion of the self? Science tells us something astonishing. The human brain is wired for empathy. Mirror neurons fire when we witness someone else's pain. That's what makes us deeply human. But what they don't tell you is this. Without boundaries, that same wiring becomes a trap. It turns you into a vessel, overflowing with everyone else's grief, while your own joy quietly dries up. And here's the heartbreaking truth. The people who take the most from you often aren't villains. They're family. They're lifelong friends. They're the people you once rocked to sleep, the ones you always showed up for, no matter the cost. Let me tell you about a man named Samuel, 84, a retired school principal. For decades, he was a pillar in his community. People leaned on him like a lighthouse in a storm. He attended every funeral, lent money without question, solved family feuds with grace. But in private, Samuel began to disappear. His health deteriorated, his spirit dulled. One night, after another emotionally draining call, he whispered to himself, "I'm tired of being needed more than I'm loved." That night, he did something radical. He turned off his phone. Not forever, just long enough to feel what silence actually sounds like. And in that silence, something awakened. Not bitterness, not selfishness, but a deep-rooted desire for peace. This is where the story bends. Emotional detachment is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self-respect. It is what the ancient Stoics taught. Men like Marcus Aurelius, who ruled empires, yet knew the greatest power was inner calm. It is what Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, discovered in the depths of suffering, that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom. You too have that freedom, especially now. You have the right to not pick up every phone call. You have the right to hear someone's sorrow without making it your own. You have the right to step away, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because emotional detachment is not coldness. It is the warmth you save for yourself. It's what gives your heart time to beat for your dreams again, not just for everyone else's dramas. So ask yourself this: what if emotional detachment is not a sign of aging, but a sign of awakening? What if it's the quiet power you've been building toward all your life? Part 2, the power of saying no. Reclaiming your sacred energy. You see, after emotional detachment comes something even harder. The courage to say no, not whispered, not wrapped in guilt, but spoken like a declaration, clear, unapologetic, and fiercely protective of your own spirit. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Just 2 letters. But for those of us raised on sacrifice, especially the generation who lived through wars, through scarcity, through the quiet expectations of society, saying no feels like betrayal. Because we were taught that good people are always available, that love means saying yes, even when you're tired, that strength means pushing through, no matter how much you're unraveling inside. But that is a lie. Let me tell you something scientists discovered. In a groundbreaking study on willpower and energy, researchers found that mental and emotional energy deplete just like physical strength. Every unwanted yes you speak chips away at your resilience. Every time you betray your own need for rest, for space, for quiet, your body keeps the score. The heart knows. The nervous system tightens, and slowly, the light within you dims. That's not compassion. That's self-abandonment. And if you look closely at the great lives, people like Maya Angelou, who once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." They all had one thing in common. They learned when to close the door. It doesn't mean they stopped loving. It means they loved wisely. Let me tell you about Rosa, 79, a widow, grandmother, and the unofficial caretaker of her entire extended family. For decades, she never said no. Babysitting on no sleep, lending money she didn't have, hosting holidays while her knees ached. Until one morning she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She was kind, but she was also exhausted, invisible, and angry. Not at others, but at herself. So, Rosa made a list, not of tasks, but of boundaries. No more last-minute favors. No more explaining her reasons. No more sacrificing her mornings, her sacred, golden mornings, for other people's emergencies. The first time she said no, her hands trembled. The second time, her voice did. But the third time, she smiled, because she realized that every no to others was a silent, powerful yes to herself. And here's the beautiful irony. The people who truly loved her didn't push back. They adapted. They respected her more. Because when you begin to say no, you reveal who around you has been taking you for granted and who has been taking you seriously. So I ask you, not gently but boldly, how many yeses in your life have been stealing from your soul? How many times have you said yes just to avoid being disliked, only to dislike yourself more? There is a fierce beauty in boundaries. They are not walls. They are doors with locks, and you hold the key. And when you start using it, when you say no without guilt, without apology, without shrinking, something incredible happens. Your energy returns. Your mornings expand. Your smile becomes real again. Not the polite one, but the deep, glowing kind that comes from freedom. Because freedom, in this chapter of life, doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from honoring yourself, fiercely, lovingly, and without compromise. Part 3, Selective Empathy, the art of caring without collapsing. But here's where it gets even more dangerous, more quietly devastating than we realize. Because it's not just your time being drained, it's your heart. You may have learned to say no to tasks, to favors, to requests you didn't have the energy for. But what about the emotional weight, the invisible loads you still carry for others? Out of habit, out of guilt, out of love? The phone rings and you already know it's not good news. The text message starts with, "Can I talk to you?" and your chest tightens. You sit across from someone who's unraveling, and even before they speak, your body has already begun to absorb their sorrow like a sponge. This is the hidden cost of living with an open heart for too long. You begin to mistake emotional suffering for moral responsibility. And if no one's ever told you this, let me be the first. You are not meant to carry everyone. You were never designed to absorb the chaos of every child, every friend, every neighbor, every broken soul who knows you're the one who listens, who feels. Empathy, for all its beauty, can become a thief. It can steal your sleep. It can steal your joy. It can steal the last peaceful years of your life if you don't learn to draw the line. And science has the proof. In studies on empathic distress fatigue, neuroscientists have shown that the brain literally begins to burn out under the weight of constant emotional attunement to others. Cortisol levels rise, immune systems weaken, memory falters, depression creeps in, not because you're weak, but because you've been feeling too much for too long. Let me tell you about Elias, 82 years old, widower, former social worker, a man with a heart the size of the sky. People came to him with everything: grief, divorce, addictions, regrets. And Elias listened, always. He'd stay up late answering calls, even when his chest felt tight, even when his legs trembled from fatigue. He once told his daughter, "I think my heart is turning into a hospital, and I don't remember the last time I discharged a patient." It wasn't until he collapsed one winter morning, literally fell in the snow outside his front porch, that he realized something chilling. There is no medal for breaking your own body in service of everyone else's healing. That fall changed him, not into a colder man, but into a wiser one. Now Elias listens differently. He listens with a filter. He offers care without absorbing crisis. He offers presence without sacrificing peace. He no longer lets other people's emergencies become his identity. Because selective empathy is not coldness. It is emotional maturity. It's what the Dalai Lama calls wise compassion, not rushing in to save, but standing steady, grounded, discerning. And if you're nodding quietly right now, feeling that lump in your throat, maybe it's because your spirit has been whispering this truth for years. You've given enough, and now it's your time to breathe without permission, to feel without drowning, to love without disappearing. So let me ask you, gently but seriously, whose pain are you still carrying that doesn't belong to you anymore? And what would happen if you finally set it down? Part 4, Guarding Time, a declaration of self-worth. After all the stories, all the sacrifices, all the invisible emotional labor, there is still something even more irreplaceable slipping through your hands. Time. Not time in the abstract, but your time. The soft, golden stretch of morning light when the world is still quiet. The afternoon nap you skip because someone needed a favor. The twilight hours you spend in conversations that leave you hollow. We don't talk about it enough. How much time is stolen in small, silent ways? How many sunsets you've missed while sitting in rooms you didn't want to be in? How many birthdays, books, hobbies, or simple moments of stillness you've traded just to be polite? And here is the harsh, sacred truth. Time after 70 is no longer something you can afford to give away cheaply. because the clock no longer ticks forward with the same indifference it once did. Now every hour is weighted. Every choice echoes louder. Think about it. You wouldn't leave your front door open and let anyone come in, take what they want, rummage through your belongings? So why do we treat our time, our very lives, as if they are open houses for everyone else's needs? Let me share the story of Miriam, 77, retired music teacher, widowed for 12 years. For most of her life, Miriam had a calendar that looked like a war map, color-coded appointments, lunch meetings, committee calls, family obligations stacked like bricks. She told herself it kept her useful. But usefulness, she would later realize, is a cage dressed as purpose. One day, her doctor gave her a diagnosis that wasn't life-threatening, but life-defining: stress-induced heart arrhythmia. The body once again keeping score. So she did something radical. She canceled everything for 1 month. No church meetings, no errands for her adult children, no coffee dates with people who never once asked how she was doing. Instead, she listened to Chopin in the mornings and baked the apple pie her husband once loved. She read poetry in bed. She sat for long, silent hours watching birds come and go. And you know what she discovered? She didn't miss the noise, but she did miss herself. The woman she used to be before she gave her life away in tiny, well-mannered pieces. Science has a term for this too: cognitive restoration. Neurologists have found that periods of unstructured, peaceful time not filled with tasks or obligations, are essential for brain health, emotional regulation, and even longevity. So when you say, "I'm not available," when you let the phone ring, when you choose a walk in the garden over a meeting about someone else's problems, you are not being selfish. You are saving your life in increments. And yes, the world will try to guilt you. But here's what you must remember. You don't owe your time to anyone who doesn't cherish it. You don't need to explain your absence. You don't need to justify your peace. You only need to live the days you have left in a way that feels true. So I ask you, from one soul to another, what would your days look like if they truly belonged to you again? And when, if not now, will you finally start living them? Part 5, Boundaries are love with a backbone. There is a kind of love that doesn't come with soft smiles or open doors. It doesn't always look gentle. It doesn't always sound sweet, but it is love still, just not the kind the world often recognizes. It's the love you give yourself when you finally say, "This far, no further." Because here's what no one warns you. When you live without boundaries, the erosion is slow, almost invisible. At first, it's just small things. A favor you didn't want to give, a visit you didn't want to make, a conversation that left you bruised inside. You tell yourself it's nothing. But over time, those nothings pile up like dust on your spirit. And one day, you wake up feeling used. Not just by others, but by your own self for allowing it all to happen. You see, boundaries are not about building walls. They're about building a home within yourself. One with locked doors and lit candles, where only those who knock with respect are allowed in. There's a story I can't forget about a man named Louis, 81, who everyone called dependable. He was the first to show up, the last to complain, the one you could call at midnight and he'd come. But behind his steady eyes was a storm, years of yeses he didn't mean, of swallowing his own truth just to keep the peace. And then something changed. One day his granddaughter, only 10 years old, and said, "Grandpa, why do you always look sad when people ask you for things?" Children, you see, have a way of slicing through our masks. That night, Louis wrote a list of every time he'd said yes when he wanted to say no. The paper filled quickly, too quickly, and for the first time in his life, he grieved for himself. The boy who was never taught to say no. The man who believed love meant availability. The elder who thought silence was strength. But that grief turned into fire. Not anger, clarity. He started small, not answering calls that came with demands, leaving gatherings early when he felt drained, pausing before replying, not out of rudeness, but out of respect for himself. And here's the miracle. He didn't become lonelier. He became lighter because the people who truly cared, they stayed. The ones who only came to take, they left. And in their absence, Louis found something he never thought he'd feel again. Freedom. Psychologists call this boundary restoration, the act of rebuilding the inner compass that tells you, I matter too. It's not about becoming hard. It's about becoming honest, about your limits, your needs, your right to exist without apology. And I ask you, gently but with urgency, how many parts of yourself have you given away just to be loved? And when will you start loving yourself enough to stop? Because love without boundaries is not love. It's a slow surrender. But love with boundaries, that's a revolution. That's a coming home. Part 6, letting go of outcomes. The art of inner peace. There is a moment, quiet, often unnoticed, when something deep inside you lets go. Not out of defeat, not out of exhaustion, but out of a knowing so ancient, so honest, it feels like truth whispered directly to your bones. You are no longer trying to control what never belonged to you. And in that letting go, you breathe differently. The shoulders you carried too high for too long begin to drop. The knot in your chest unravels. The world doesn't change, but suddenly it doesn't own you anymore. You see, for most of our lives, we are taught to manage outcomes, manage relationships, manage how others perceive us, how conversations end, how our children turn out, how our pasts are remembered. But here's what no one teaches you until it's almost too late. Control is an illusion dressed as responsibility. You can raise your children with love and wisdom and still watch them make heartbreaking choices. You can speak the right words and still be misunderstood. You can pour your energy into something for years and still see it fall apart. And none of that means you failed. It just means you're human. Let me tell you about Eleanor. 84, widowed twice, mother of 4. She once lived in the realm of worry, tightly wound around every decision her family made. She wanted them to be safe, to avoid pain, to choose wisely. But her worry became a prison. She couldn't sleep. Her blood pressure soared. Her laughter became rare. Until one day during a quiet walk, she stopped and asked herself, what if my worry isn't love, but fear in disguise? And so she made a vow. To love without hovering, to speak only when asked, to stop rewriting other people's stories in her head. Now Eleanor prays with open hands, not clenched fists. She listens without interrupting fate. She trusts that what is hers will find her, and what isn't was never meant to stay. And the science, it supports this too. Studies in positive aging have shown that emotional resilience, the ability to adapt, release, and find meaning, is one of the greatest predictors of peace and longevity in later life. It's not control that keeps us well. It's acceptance. So what does letting go really look like? It's allowing conversations to end without perfect closure. It's watching others misjudge you and choosing not to defend. It's making peace with unfinished business, with roads you'll never walk again, with versions of yourself you've outgrown. Letting go isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's what happens when you've climbed enough mountains to know that not every peak needs conquering. Some are just meant to be admired from a distance. So I leave you with this. What would it feel like to stop holding the steering wheel of everyone else's life? What space would open within you for rest, for laughter, for stillness, if you stopped chasing outcomes and started trusting your own becoming? Because in the quiet after surrender, in the space where control once lived, there lives something softer, more sacred. Peace. Not the fragile kind that trembles with every phone call, but the kind that arrives like a sunrise, not because you summoned it, but because you finally made room for it. So now we arrive at the end, or perhaps the beginning of a different kind of life, one not built on the endless giving, pleasing, proving, but on the radical, revolutionary act of returning to yourself. You've listened to every word, not just with your ears, but with the corners of your memory, with the weight in your chest, with the parts of you that have gone unheard for too long. And now a question remains, not loud but insistent. What if the rest of your life belongs to you? Not in theory, not as a nice idea, but in practice, in the shape of your days, in the people you allow in the boundaries you finally keep, in the mornings that are quiet because you chose silence. Will it be easy? Number. There will be guilt. There will be pushback. There will be moments you wonder if reclaiming your peace is worth the discomfort. But there will also be something else, something gentler, more honest. There will be stillness. And in that stillness, a voice, not the critical one, not the fearful one, but the voice that says, this is who you were before the world taught you to disappear. So here is your invitation and your challenge. Dare to be misunderstood. Dare to say no. Dare to rest. Dare to stop carrying what was never yours. Because the truth is, you were never meant to be a reservoir for other people's chaos. You were meant to be a river flowing freely, gently, deeply toward your own becoming. So go now. Not with noise, not with force, but with clarity. And may the days ahead be softer, not because life has changed, but because you have. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until we meet again, protect your peace, guard your joy, and never ever apologize for choosing yourself.